We're almost halfway through the year, and a lot of people are running on empty without fully realizing it. Grow Therapy helps you find care that's covered by insurance before burnout becomes the baseline. Whether it's your first time in therapy or your 50th, Grow makes it easier to find a therapist who fits you, not the other way around. They connect you with thousands of independent licensed therapists across the U.S., offering both virtual and in-person sessions, nights and weekends. You can search by what matters, like insurance, specialty, identity, or availability, and get started in as little as 2 days. And if something comes up, you can cancel up to 24 hours in advance at no cost. There are no subscriptions, no long-term commitments. You just pay per session. Grow helps you find therapy on your time. Whatever challenges you're facing, Grow Therapy is here to help. Grow accepts over 100 insurance plans, including Medicaid in some states. Sessions average about $21 with insurance, and some pay as little as $0 depending on their plan. Visit growtherapy.com/booknow to get started. That's growtherapy.com/booknow. growtherapy.com/booknow. Availability and coverage vary by state and insurance plan.
This is Peter.
And this is Tom.
And you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to our podcast. Tommy, what do we got?
Well, in honor of Valentine's Day, right? We are
Indeed.
going to be looking at the St. Valentine's Day Massacre.
Yeah, February 14th.
February 14th, 1929.
1920.
So we're looking at that. I know, Pete, you love the whole 1920s mob scene for whatever reason. You know, not dissing it, but it seems to be something that you're very into. So
I don't know about the mob scene, but I mean, I do like the 20s and 30s and like hard-boiled detective stuff, but, you know.
Well, the
there's
mob.
some of that here. The FBI's here. We'll
with-
talk about the FBI.
They're
There's some FBI.
dealing with the mob.
Indeed. I don't think it's going to be the longest one, but we'll probably talk about more or less, we'll start off with Prohibition and just the rise of crime. And this is primarily taking place in Chicago. I mean, obviously the St. Valentine's Day Massacre takes place in Chicago, but the crime scene, I feel like the epicenter of it was Chicago. So I think that's where we're going to concentrate
That's
on.
what's going on. Yeah, that we can talk about that because from 24 to 30, Chicago was basically had a reputation for being violent lawlessness. And it was the same time when Al Capone, right, basically was.
Yeah, so let's just get right. Yeah, let's just get right to it.
He's the one who's taking all over because of Prohibition.
Yep. So Prohibition essentially starts, but the 18th Amendment in 1920, which makes it illegal to make, produce, distribute alcohol, and
Consume everything.
Right. Even when we teach this topic, the biggest effect of the prohibition is actually lawlessness, violence, lawlessness, and crime, because people still wanted to have their alcohol, and ultimately
they're still going to get
result,
it. Yeah, it didn't stop people from getting it. It just stopped government control of it or government regulation of it.
Yep.
So you still had the illegal manufacturing and sale. You had the speakeasies.
But actually, there was more
gambling.
speakeasies. Did you see that there was more speakeasies in New York City during the prohibition than there were actual bars before the prohibition started?
Yeah, they said Capone was making about $60 million a year, and that's $60 million in 1920s money.
Yep.
Which is very different in monies. Yeah. So he was raking in money at this time because of this. Because there's so much money out there on the line, there's going to be rivals, and that's what's going to happen here. So Capone is very powerful, but it's people that want a piece of that pie also. He's going to want to increase his holdings also, and that's what's going to lead to some problems, which then lead to this massacre.
And Capone also, just like talking about Capone, I mean, this isn't just about bootlegging, because a lot of it was bootlegging. A lot of it was bringing alcohol down from Canada, right? That was the primary supplier of our illegal alcohol. But, we're also talking about running the speakeasies themselves and running the drinking establishments, gambling within those establishments, as well as prostitution. Like, he had, you name it. I mean, he had pretty much
he had control of it all. Yeah, he had his hands were in all these different pots, and he's making a lot of money.
And actually, so Capone gets this. This whole empire really starts with his former boss, right, Johnny Torino,
Brooklyn.
So Torino actually eventually goes to Chicago, becomes one of the main mob bosses in Chicago. Not the only one, which we'll get to in a second. It's a booming business, right? Gambling, prostitution is really what he starts off with. And then when 1920 hits and the 18th Amendment, that's when they kind of start shifting a little bit from the gambling, prostitution into really bootlegging per se. That becomes like the most lucrative field. And Capone he's like a thug. He's like a bookkeeper, like a street smart thug. And while he's working for Johnny Torrio, he kind of quickly starts to be promoted, further, 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 and eventually more or less takes over from Torrio, right?
Well, he retired to Brooklyn. So there
That's what
was
it
a
is.
he was seriously wounded in 1924. There was a they tried to someone tried to kill him, so
Yep.
he seriously wounded. So instead, he just retires to Brooklyn, and then that's pretty. Then what Capone basically does so that he starts to consolidate power in Chicago,
He leaves his
gunning
business.
down his rivals. Yeah,
Yep, he leaves the business to Capone. And that's kind of where we get into this idea that Capone is not the only gangster or mob in the
no,
city of
but he,
Chicago.
but but he is ruthless as far as he's gunning down his rivals. They said in 1924 there were 16 gang-related murders, and
Yep,
and it continues with 29. And there was actually 64 murders in 1 year during this time. And like,
yep,
how is this happening so much? It's because the FBI I didn't really have as much jurisdiction as it did today, and
yep.
it couldn't, and it had no power over Chicago gang-related activity. That really doesn't change until like
Yeah,
James
but
Ross.
even like FBI at the time, we have to understand that they're not even allowed to carry guns. They're not
No, they're
given.
mostly dealing. They're not really getting involved in this.
No, yeah. So any form of, and this leads to the change in the FBI
Yeah,
because up to this point, FBI agents did not carry guns, and if they had a gun, they would have to have their own gun, which they would have to have their own permit for. Because we're not issued any form of weapons from the bureau. Also, besides that, their jurisdiction did not go into murders. Really thefts nor kidnappings. Primarily, it was more like insurance fraud or any form of like government fraud. They didn't
counterfeiting stuff like that.
counterfeiting.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was really nothing there that would make them be the main bureau or really the main police force to be going against these gangsters. And that starts to really change here because a lot of these gangsters are also robbing banks. And they're also start, because of the invention of the car, they start basically jumping from one state to another. And therefore, the state police couldn't really handle it because they had no jurisdiction in new states once the criminal escaped to another state. So this is also kind of how we have the FBI starts to gain more traction because of the fact that these gangsters are growing. It's almost like the people are starting to have a little bit more respect for the FBI as in a sense as like the federal government can do something about this.
Well, they're looking, yeah, because they get kind of like, I guess after this massacre, like we talked about, people are looking like, is Chicago just helpless? Like, how is something this crazy happen in the city in broad daylight? Is there?
Yep.
It's got to be something that can kind
And
of
there was a
like
lot of things, the
fix this.
corruption of police, like if
Oh
the
yeah,
police, because there's, and we'll get to that as well.
and there's been so much public outcry that things
Yep.
have to change
And there's some police is implicated to some extent in this
to some extent.
massacre as
Yeah,
well. So therefore, people are like, well, if we can't trust the police, we can't trust the state, then who can we trust? And that's where the federal government comes into play. Well, you could trust us, and you have a new guy that's in charge of the FBI, and his name is J. Edgar Hoover, who's brings in this idea of fingerprinting and checking ballistics and looking at. I mean, what he kind of ushers in, they called it like the lab, the FBI lab, and he's like, no, we're going to be a legitimate force, and this is kind of coexisting and starts to rise up the FBI as we know it because of the rise of organized crime. We should also mention that when Al Capone is a celebrity, I mean, there's movies at the time in 1930s,
oh, he's
20s,
popular.
and
Yeah,
30s.
people
Yeah,
know him.
like they're glorifying ultimately
He's
gangsters.
handing out food during the Great Depression, stuff like that. Like he's
Yep,
doing things.
yep.
He's doing it for his public image,
Well, of course.
but also,
I mean, like I
but
said, I mean, as you pointed out, in 29 alone, killing 64 people. I mean, anyone that got in his way, he's slowly consolidating his power. Except there is actually one other enemy and one other rivaling gang, I guess, in Chicago at this time. And that is an Irish gang that is
yes.
led by an Irish gangster, George Bugs Moran.
Moran,
Um,
yes, the North Side Gang is what they're known as.
Yep. And then Moran's gang is this all same premise, right? Bootlegging operation. Their bootlegging operation goes out of a garage, right? And that's kind of how this St. Valentine's Day
Well,
really
they
comes
didn't.
into
Yeah.
play.
Well, I guess we'll get into it, right?
Yeah.
Capone, according to what historians were able to put together, is he? They believe he orders this hit, right?
Yep.
And the design of this hit is to get rid of
Moran.
Moran. That's the main thing. They want to just get rid of him. All right.
Yep.
Possibly his second in command, a man by the name of Albert Shellick, also known
Yep.
as, he had an alias known as James Clark. We were kind of the ones that they figured out he'd probably be there too. Fine, we'll kill him. Doesn't exactly happen that way. And the idea is they're luring in there because they believe that there was a promise
Yep.
of stolen high rate whiskey that was supposedly taken by another gang in the area, a gang known as the Purple Gang. Did you see this?
Yep. I did see that.
Or the Sugar House Gang. also known as. They were hijackers, bootleggers, mostly from Jewish descent, Jewish gangsters. So you had all these different ones that would work together. And so sometimes they'd work together, sometimes they wouldn't. But what's going on is Bugs Moran was apparently coming in on some of Al Capone's territory, not respecting the boundaries, not paying his royalties basically to Capone. So therefore, he's like, all right, I'm gonna take him out.
And this was the last one. After this, historians are very clear about the fact that Al Capone finally consolidated his full control over Chicago after
Yeah,
this particular hit. And even though he did not get Bugs Moran, he basically destroyed Bugs Moran's operation through
he was
this.
done after this. Yeah, no one was gonna work with him.
Yep.
But it also brings a lot of
Dead
heat
Men
on other
Walking.
people.
Dead Men
It
Walking,
also
right?
brings a lot of heat on the people in there. A lot of prosecutors will start going after the mob families now,
Yep.
like Capone, a lot of his higher up. So it brings a lot more attention to them than probably they would have wanted, and probably they thought it would.
There's a total of 7 people that are killed in this particular place, right? You
They didn't
have
think there was supposed to be that many people there either.
Yeah, they thought it was going to be really Bugs Moran and maybe a second in command, like the James Clark, as you mentioned. But really, so Bugs Moran, as he arrives, he's almost there. He arrives there, but he winds up seeing a police car, right? And he's like, police car. And he just keeps on walking. So he actually doesn't make it in there. But you have Moran's second in command. You also have a bookkeeper, the gang's Moran's good bookkeeper that's there, business manager. You have enforcers, these two brothers that are like Mafia Moran's enforcers, and 2 other collaborators. And I think there's a mechanic as well,
That
if I'm
just
right.
happened to be there. Yeah, he wasn't
Yep.
necessarily a mobster. He did work on their cars.
And after this shooting, where you basically this happens at Moran's place, North Clark Street. These guys are shot down. They're lined up against the wall, and they're shot down with Thompson submachine guns. The history of Thompson guns is kind of cool too, because it's a high rate submachine gun that came out. Actually, was being designed for World War One, and they designed it like in the last month or so of World War One, and it was just too late to really get them to American soldiers. So all of a sudden, war ends, and the United States has designed this ultra high rate firing gun, and they're like, well, what do we do with this now? And actually they didn't have to worry about it because it became the most popular gun of the gangsters and the gangster mafia and stuff in the
Yeah, but
20s.
you could just pump out so much ammunition
Yeah. And
so
eventually,
quickly.
it becomes, obviously it's brought back into World War II, but before that, it's really made a name for itself during this time.
Yeah,
So
mobster gun.
when these first of all, did you see this thing where one guy actually survived? He had
Yeah,
14 bullet wounds.
yeah, Frank
Yep.
Gunsberg. He actually survived. They said he got 14 bullet wounds. They asked him who did it. He kept on replying, "No one shot me."
Isn't that crazy? Like,
Yeah, because he didn't want to be a rat. And yeah, so he
crazy.
died 3 hours later. He dies from his wounds. They can't save him, but he does die. But basically, so they get lured, and like Peter said, they're lined up on the wall. They're sprayed left to right, shot and killed. They're all dressed in their best clothing and stuff like that. They were looking like, because they thought they were going to this business meeting. The big thing was, well, I think 2 of the people who committed the shootings were dressed as police officers, right? I'm
Yep.
sure you saw this. So a lot of things, were they police officers, were they not? But 2 of the people, I guess we'll talk about in a few bit about being supposedly suspects involved in this case, that was kind of what they did, that they did dress up as police
Yep.
officers. That's
Yep.
what they did. But the idea is, because people, this was the middle of the day, people heard the gunshots. And to give the appearance that everything was under control, the men in street clothes came walking out with their hands up, and you had the 2 uniformed policemen behind them. And then they got into the car and drove off. So they kind of, I guess something did happen, but the police got the bad guys, got the
Yeah,
people who
because the
did it.
two fake cops walked out the 2 other nicely dressed people out
Yeah,
at gunpoint, basically like, yeah, we're fine, we got this, we're arresting these people. There was something happening, but actually all 4 of them were the ones doing the shooting. And like I said, the whole premise was to get Moran, and he was not there. And
he wasn't
supposedly,
there.
Al Capone was extremely upset about the fact that
But they killed so many.
that
Yeah,
they
because
killed so many.
Capone was in Florida at the time, so
Yep.
that was his alibi. I'm not even there, right? I'm not there. But apparently, George Moran was
Yep.
on his way there, like you said, and he missed only by a few minutes. And a few days later, he caught up to reporters, and he told reporters only Capone kills like that. So like,
Crazy, right?
he would put it in people's mind right away that Capone was definitely part of this. He was the one that did this.
There was not many witnesses to this, but there were some. There
There's like a
was.
driver who sideswiped the police car, and
Yep.
they said the policeman came outside and just said keep on going. That's why they think that it was probably a fake policeman. And it was missing a tooth, and that matches the description of a guy. I forgot the guy's name.
Burke.
Right? You said Burke,
Fred
yeah.
Burke.
Right. Fred Burke.
Yep.
He was probably one of the people involved. Because what you have to understand about this, we'll talk about some people, but no one was ever brought up on charges related to the St. Valentine's massacre.
Yep.
No one was ever brought up
Still a
on
cold
trial
case.
anyway. on it because they just never had enough evidence. They think they know so many people were involved. They think so many people were involved got killed shortly thereafter
Yep.
for retribution. But as far as being actually put on trial for the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, never happened.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I think that the idea here is the big one is this Fred Burke character, right? So apparently, what happened here just before the killings, there's a truck driver, Elmer Lewis, and he turns a corner right around from the garage, and he sideswipes this police car, right? So he's like, "Oh gosh, like I just hit a police car." So he like is about to get out of his car, and the police officer is like, "No, it's fine. Go. You're fine. You're fine." But what was interesting, like you said, he paid attention. He's like, "This cop was missing a front tooth." So it's like that's kind of weird. And there was another witness to the accident that was standing by the street, and he gave the same description, like, yeah, so this guy hit this police car. The police officer seemed kind of nervous and just said, "No worry about it, go." And he was missing this tooth. So then the police were pretty confident that they were looking at Fred Burke. He was basically a former member of another gang, and they were known. Him and this other guy were actually known to wear police uniforms whenever they went on a
Yeah,
robbery
that was what
spree.
they think. They used to go on robberies, rob banks basically, but they would always do it dressed up as police officers. So it kind
Right.
of fit because there was some talk that it might have been a couple of these police officers that did it because the North Side gang murdered one of their brothers or murdered a
Yep.
cop's child. So they were thinking maybe that was retribution, but they couldn't really prove that. And this other one kind of fits the story a little bit more, fits the narrative.
Yep, and this is kind of where it becomes interesting because they actually do wind up raiding Burke's bungalow, right? They find
Yeah.
a large trunk containing bulletproof vest, about $320,000 in bonds that were recently stolen from Wisconsin Bank, where he was dressed as a police officer, stealing
Yeah,
it.
but the big thing was they found what? I mean,
The
we
two
saw
Thompson machine. Yeah, go ahead.
they
Yeah,
found the Thompson. They found the Thompson submachine guns, and they do have that like ballistic,
yeah. This was new. The new
that they could do back
forensics.
then. And they determined that that the guns were used in the massacre, and they were also used in the murder of a Brooklyn mob boss, Frankie Yale. So
Yep,
that's basically what they were able to bring them up on those charges.
yep.
They couldn't actually bring them the other ones.
And they do eventually find Burke. About a year later, they capture him. Just because it's like circumstantial evidence, just because he has a gun in his car, in his house, does not mean that he's the one that did the shooting. So, even though it was the strongest case they can make, he was eventually sentenced to life imprisonment. What they really got him for was the bank robberies, and they wind up getting this guy that potentially was one of the shooters. But again, we don't know if he really was. He winds up dying in prison in 1940, so he does not stick around too long.
And none of these guys particularly talk that much
No,
after they're arrested. They don't really do that. The only one that talks is that man,
Barker.
Bolton.
Oh,
Bolton.
Bolton.
He talks a little bit afterwards, but he's much older at the time. He's basically saying that he was involved in it and stuff like that. They were part of the what they were called the American Boys,
Yep.
which was a group of bank robbers, basically that Capone kind of used on and off, and that Capone actually like planned that to
Although we
use
still
them in
don't,
this
but we
killing.
still don't know if it was Capone. I mean, ultimately,
No, but they think it probably was. And he benefited the most from it because, like you said, the Morton's business after this was done. Like they still existed as a gang, but they were nowhere. And Capone's reach just kept on getting
wow.
stronger and stronger after this point. I think we should talk about a little bit like the legacy itself of what this did. Like we said, it brought a lot of pressure on them. It's become part of like Americana too. Like the bricks of the place were eventually demolished in 1967, and the place actually now is a parking lot for a nursing home. But the bricks were purchased by a Canadian businessman, and they were displayed in a bunch of these like novelty displays. But now they're on the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. You can actually go there and you can see like the bullet holes and stuff like that.
And
Actually,
overall,
in there.
like you said, the public outcry was intense, and it led Herbert Hoover to really give a lot more
That was the fallout.
powers
Yeah.
to
Well,
the
that's the
federal.
creation of Elliot Ness and his Untouchables, right?
Yep.
Come from this.
Um, yeah. So federal government really steps up their game, and they kind of are given that ability by the federal government, Herbert Hoover as well as Congress. Like, all right, we got to do this. Supreme Court rules in 1927 that income gained on illegal activities is now taxable. Right. So it gives the government basically a strong case for prosecuting Capone because they couldn't get Capone for anything else. They continuously try to, like, after this, Capone becomes number one in Chicago. There's no question about it.
Yeah, he's not. He's the public enemy number one.
Yep, absolutely. They're trying to somehow find something on Capone.
They find him in contempt of court at
Yep.
times, right? And like I said, anything they could just because they know they can't make the other stuff stick. Well, tax evasion is what they eventually get him on.
Well, eventually they get him on tax evasion, but before that, they get him on some other stuff. I'm trying to figure out what they
Well,
got him
he
on.
fails to appear. He says he's hurt. He says he's too injured or he's too sick to appear in court. So usually it's failing to appear. So he's charged with being contempt of court and he's sentenced to 6 months in jail for that.
Mm-hmm.
Then the Treasury Department launches an investigation on him, and that's when they get him for the income tax evasion.
Yeah, that's what it was.
And
And they
he
sent him to
basically gets
prison
that
for 11 years, right?
11 years, and he served 7 first, and then later Alcatraz. Right, we talked about Alcatraz in a
Mm-hmm.
previous episode. You can listen to that. So he was eventually he's released in 39, but by 47 he's dead. He's released, but he's basically like a recluse. Right, he's very sick.
Yep. Well, he also has syphilis. They said that
Yeah,
syphilis started going into some of like he had brain issues and dementia, and they said he was really like a recluse. Like he
yeah, he
basically
was
died
pretty
from
much.
cardiac arrest in 47.
Yeah, yeah. Like once he got out of the jail, I'd say he was pretty much done. He wasn't like didn't have the power he once did.
So, I mean, a lot of this really stems from the fact that, the federal government, the FBI went after him because he got
Of
so
the
much
same.
attention because of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. I mean, this is what brought him full control of Chicago. And that's also what brought the heat on him. Like if he wasn't the number one until he became number one with the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And from that point forward, the federal government basically makes it their mission to get this guy behind bars, which they do.
Would have did this to consolidate power, get stronger. And it worked in the short term, but in the long term, it also led to his downfall.
All right. Well, I guess this is it for our nice short little podcast for Valentine's Day. Not really the romantic type, but nonetheless,
No. But it's
interesting. Still
makes
deals with
it
Valentine's Day,
sure.
right?
Yes.
Yes.
Why
Let's
not?
go with that. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning in once more. We appreciate it. If you need to find us, you can find us at www.historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com. And have an awesome week, guys. Enjoy.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast. And if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.